In the 9th century, one name struck fear into the hearts of kings across Europe. A name whispered in terror from the monasteries of England to the palaces of France. Ragnar Lothbrok. But was he a real man, or just a legend? Here's the problem with Ragnar Lothbrok. We don't actually know if he existed, not in the way we know about Charlemagne or Alfred the Great. There are no contemporary records written during his lifetime, no coins bearing his face, no treaties signed in his name. Everything we know comes from sagas written down centuries after his supposed death. Stories passed down through generations of Vikings, growing more legendary with each retelling. But here's what historians believe. Ragnar Lothbrok wasn't one man. He was probably a composite of several Viking warriors and chieftains whose deeds were so extraordinary, their stories merged into a single legendary figure, and the real men behind the legend. They terrorized Europe like nothing seen before or since. Our story begins in the early 9th century. Scandinavia was a harsh land of fjords, forests, and bitter winters. For the Norse people, the sea wasn't a barrier. It was a highway, and the Vikings had perfected the ultimate raiding machine. The long ship. Shallow draft meant they could navigate rivers deep into enemy territory, fast, maneuverable, and utterly terrifying when a fleet appeared on your horizon. According to the sagas, Ragnar's first major target was the kingdom of Northumbria in England. The year was approximately 865 AD, though some sources place his raids earlier. The English weren't prepared. Their kingdoms were divided, constantly fighting amongst themselves. Their monasteries, filled with gold and silver, sat undefended near the coast. To the Vikings, these were perfect targets. The monks had no weapons, no training. They believed their god would protect them. They were wrong. But Ragnar's most legendary raid wasn't in England, it was in Francia. The year was 845 AD, and his target was Paris itself. King Charles the Bold received reports of a massive Viking fleet sailing up the Seine. 120 ships, thousands of warriors, led by a chieftain the Franks called Ragnar, almost certainly Ragnar. Charles split his army, positioning forces on both sides of the river. A classic tactical move, or so he thought. Ragnar attacked one side with his full force. The Frankish soldiers fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed. The Vikings didn't just defeat them, they annihilated them. And then Ragnar did something that would echo through history. He hanged 111 captured Frankish soldiers where the army on the opposite bank could see them. It was psychological warfare at its most brutal. The message was clear: surrender or share their fate. The remaining Frankish forces broke and ran. Paris lay defenseless, but Ragnar didn't sack the city. He did something smarter. He negotiated. King Charles paid him 7,000 pounds of silver, a staggering fortune, just to make the Vikings leave. It was the first Danegeld, protection money, and it set a dangerous precedent. Because once the Vikings knew you'd pay them to go away, they'd keep coming back. But Ragnar wasn't just a warrior. The sagas tell us he had 2 famous wives, and their stories are just as legendary as his. First was Lagertha, and she wasn't some passive Viking housewife. According to the Danish historian Saxo Grammaticus, Lagertha was a shield-maiden, a warrior in her own right. The saga says Ragnar first saw her fighting in battle. She fought so ferociously that he fell in love with her warrior spirit. They married, had children, but eventually divorced. His second wife was Aslaug. The sagas paint her as a mysterious beauty with royal blood. Some versions claim she was a vulva, a Norse seer with magical powers. And it was Aslaug who gave Ragnar his most famous children, 4 sons who would become legendary in their own right: Ivar, Bjorn, Hvitserk, and Sigurd. These 4 boys would grow up to become the most feared Viking warriors in history. But before they could take revenge for their father, he had to die. By the 860s, Ragnar was aging. His raiding days should have been behind him. But legends don't retire quietly. According to the sagas, Ragnar planned one final raid on England. But fate had other plans. A massive storm struck his fleet. Ships were destroyed, warriors drowned. The survivors washed up on the coast of Northumbria, right in the territory of King Aella, a king who had every reason to hate Vikings. Ragnar and his men were captured, and King Aella decided to make an example of the legendary Viking raider. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle tells us that Aella ordered a pit to be dug and filled it with venomous snakes. As the snakes bit into his flesh, Ragnar supposedly sang his death song, a poem recounting his victories, his glories, and ending with words that would doom King Aella. How the little pigs would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffers. The little pigs were his sons, and when news of their father's death reached them, they were anything but little. Ivar, Bjorn, Hvitserk, and Sigurd gathered the largest Viking army ever assembled. They called it the Great Heathen Army. And their only goal is to make King Aella pay for what he did to their father. But the revenge they took, it was so brutal, so shocking, that people still debate whether it really happened. It's called the Blood Eagle, and in the next episode, we'll tell you exactly what that means. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss episode 2, where we reveal the horrifying details of Ragnar's death and the beginning of his son's revenge. Thanks for watching.